Hey everybody, Jake here with Jake Wu Market Research to go over a quick weekend market update and analysis into the week ahead. Before we start, I want to just mention that I do have a Twitter subscription for $10 a month that I really go into detail on the broad markets and different trade ideas every day as well as on the weekends. So if you do want more in-depth analysis on not only the broad markets but also individual names like Apple, Tesla, Meta, those types of names, I do analysis and updates on those every day. Looking at things that you just may not want to do on your own. Looking for gaps. What are the gap fills? What are the different levels? What is the VWAP? Doing, really highlighting things so you don't have to do the dirty work and the manual work. So the subscription is really, one, about updating the markets in general and giving different levels, but two, also highlighting different ideas and different setups that you may not have time to find. So definitely check out the Twitter subscription. There is a link in the video description below that you can check out. It's $10 a month. Very, very reasonable. Next thing, we are going over futures. So ES, NQ, CL, so the S&P 500, NASDAQ, and then just crude oil as the first three tickers. So if you are interested in futures, I have partnered with a broker, Optimus Futures. If you want to give them a try, I will also add the link in the description so you can give them a look as well. So let's jump into it. All in all, we did have a pretty strong pullback this week, 3 days in a row where we pretty much opened and just continued straight down for this short week. However, we did have price finally catching a bid at this August 18th pivot VWAP here on Thursday. And remember, I do these videos on Friday, so when I say today, I'm talking about Friday. And then today we did get a nice gap up and move to the upside for the last day of the week. One thing that I'll mention here is 45.25 to 45.45 has really been an area of resistance pretty much since early August. So we did get a nice bounce in mid to late August. However, we did fail to get through that 45.25 to 45.45 zone above. So naturally, that is going to be a really important area to close above if we do want to get some traction to the upside. So really on the daily chart for ES, you want to really close, as I mentioned, right above 4,545 to really get a continuation up and possibly out of this just consolidation phase that we've been in pretty much since August. We did have a pretty big move down into the beginning of August, but then we've just really been kind of chopping around and consolidating. As I mentioned, we did get a bottom forming on the 18th of August, but from there we did have a couple week move up. And now we're just kind of still chopping around below that 45.25 to 45.45 area. Now, if we do get a pullback, I went over the upside levels. If we do get a pullback, your main level to watch below is just this gap that fills at 44.71.75. So that's just the gap up on Friday. And if we do continue down, this VWAP zone anywhere from around 4,442 all the way up to around 44.55. Below is your August 18th pivot VWAP zone. So, that would be the main area to watch below. Notice that it's a little hard to use this VWAP too perfectly because notice back in August 24th, we did get a big candle down, closed below this VWAP, and then continued up. Now, the one thing I will mention about this is when you do have an anchored VWAP and there's only 4 days since the VWAP happened, a lot of the time you will get an undercut or a close below the VWAP because it's just not that established yet. So once you have 2 to 3 weeks, or let's just call it 15 to 20 candles after the pivot, the VWAP definitely is a lot more reliable. So the first couple candles after a VWAP is anchored, you're going to have kind of noise around that area. So just something to keep in mind using the anchored VWAP. The first 4 or 5 days, you can easily get these undercuts like we saw on the 24th and the 25th of August. But as I mentioned, going into next week, first downside area below is 44.71.75. That would be your main area to watch below. And then as I mentioned before, as we rejected right at the bottom of this zone, right around 45.25, give or take maybe a couple dollars, this is clearly making the market here and continuing to act as resistance even into September. So that is the update for ES. We'll look at NQ here. NQ is a little different. We do have this previous resistance zone, but also it was a support zone back in late July. So this is why we're calling it an SR flip zone, because it was previous support, flipped to resistance as we broke down back in early August. We continued down, and then over the last week and a half, this area has once again acted as resistance from around 15,483.75 all the way up to around 15,540. Notice, once again, we failed to close above this area, so this is still very much making the market here. But we also have this confluence zone. So confluence is just when you have multiple levels or multiple different indicators all aligning. So in this case, not only do we have this horizontal level here that price rejected at, but we also have this diagonal trend zone at which price did get into this area a little bit on Friday. But notice that we rejected at the resistance zone and we rejected at this SR flip zone, at least as a function of the daily close. We did not get a daily close above that area, the 15,540. If we do get a pullback going into the week ahead, the main area to watch below is the gap that fills at 15,395.75. If we continue down, the previous low, which is also right in line with that August 18th pivot VWAP, would be your next area to watch, and that's right around 15,150. The VWAP zone ranges anywhere from around 15,115 all the way up to around 15,185, give or take a couple dollars. So this is definitely something to keep in mind going into the week ahead. If we can get a break and close above not only the SR flip zone, but also this diagonal resistance zone that did act as pretty decent resistance back in early September, and it's hard to say this was resistance because we're actually connecting the wick from July 31st to the wick of September 1st. So this diagonal trend zone wasn't really relevant until you get 2 points, right? So when I say it acted as resistance, this is just where our second point of resistance comes from when you are drawing this diagonal trend zone. So now we can definitely say up to around 15,625, or actually into Monday, that would be closer to 15,610. So that would be your main area to close above on the daily chart if we really wanted to kind of break out of this confluence of resistance. So let's call it 15,610 is what we want to see close above on the daily candle into the week ahead, or whatever point. It just, when you do have a diagonal zone, these levels change because they're sloped, right? Going into Monday, it's 15,610, but if this chops around for the next 10 days and all of a sudden we're over here on, let's say, September 20th, all of a sudden the top of this resistance zone, the diagonal resistance zone, is at around 15,535. So when you are looking at diagonal zones, you really just have to look at the zone into the next day, next week, whatever candle that you're looking at. And remember that this is sloped. It's not static. So if you're watching this video on Wednesday of next week, this 15,610 zone, the top of it is not going to be 15,610. If we go into Wednesday the 13th, all of a sudden that zone is then going to be around 15,587. So just remember these levels do change, especially for diagonal zones, just like levels change on a VWAP or a moving average. As time passes, these levels change. For the diagonal zones, it's because it's sloped. For the moving averages, for the VWAPs, it's because new information is coming in and price is evolving, and that's why you get the change day over day or candle over candle. Going into oil had a huge and really important breakout this week. So pretty much this resistance zone all the way back from pretty much originating from November of 2022, we finally got a breakout through that area this week. So this was definitely a pretty status quo changing breakout that we had last Friday, and then we continued up this week. Now, one thing I'll mention, anytime you have a breakout like this, it's always a potential support resistance flip. So this was previous resistance. So now we're calling this an SR flip zone because if we pull back, this is where we would assume that we would potentially find support. So all the way down to around 83.25 would be the bottom of this SR flip zone. So if we do get a pullback going into next week, that would be the area to watch below. Anywhere from around 83.25 to 84.75 is this zone of a potential support resistance flip. Now, if we do just continue up, the November 22nd pivot area here is the next main resistance level above. So that's anywhere from 91.75 all the way up to 93.75. You could argue that you've got a little bit of a flag forming here over the last 3 days for oil. But if we do get a pullback in the markets, 83.25 to 84.75 is your main level to watch below to hold. If we get a daily close below 83.25, that's when things may get a little bit more bearish, but it is healthy to get pullbacks and retests of a resistance zone, simply just called an SR flip. So that is oil. We'll see if we do get a continuation up next week. I think oil going up is definitely spooking a lot of people, thinking that inflation readings are going to be higher in the future because of that. We'll just have to see and go from there. And just follow price, because that's all we can really do. Now we'll go over Bitcoin. Bitcoin is really in this just classic Bitcoin behavior that it sometimes does, where literally it looks like, someone's heart rate reading in a hospital. It's just pretty much flat. Then you've got this crazy spike over the last 2 weeks, and then you're right back to where we started. This area that we are holding happens to be the November 22 low. So November of 2022, we're anchoring into VWAP from this area. Notice how there's times where price action did break below this VWAP. So if you want to look at the original VWAP, notice how you've got times where price broke down. Notice, as I mentioned earlier, the first few days you're always going to have price kind of undercut. However, notice here back in December of 2022, back in both times in December 2022, we undercut this VWAP. Notice here we also undercut this VWAP in March, second week of March. And then we slightly undercut it back here in mid-August before we bottomed out. So what I want to do is I want to capture some of that price action, so I'm creating more of a zone rather than just an exact price to watch. So in this case, I have a 0.25 standard deviation band. And you can see here the lower band is pretty much capturing a decent amount of the move that we saw back in March. So we're capturing some of that price action that didn't respect the VWAP perfectly. Now, one interesting thing is you can also do a percentage band calculation now on TradingView, which is really cool. So if you wanted to just simply add, let's say, a 5% band, you can see that it's offsetting this band literally by exactly 5%, where the standard deviation band is more or less kind of a function. Oops, what did we just do there? That is not 5. We had that at 0.25. And you can see this is kind of a function of price changes, and a 0.25 deviation at this lower price in the 16s is going to be different than a deviation in the mid 20,000s. So that's kind of where that standard deviation band gets wider and wider. But it really depends on what you want to use. I like the standard deviation bands, but I also like to use percent bands. Either way, I would say down to around 24,000 is the bottom of this zone. So we're technically still kind of in this higher low type of scenario as price respects this VWAP zone. The main problem on the upside is this huge area of break-even supply. Break-even supply is essentially market participants, if I can speak. Market participants are holding at a loss, shown by this volume here, of the volume profile. And this volume profile is also anchored from this November 2022 low. So we're measuring the volume profile from the November 2022 low, just like we are anchoring the VWAP, same exact spot. So pretty much all the way up to right around 27,000, all the way up to the point of control, which is right around 28,250, you have a lot of supply that you would need to get through in order to break above this area. So the way to look at it is, let's assume you bought Bitcoin at 28,000. We're now at 25,800. We get back to 28,000. We get back to your break-even point. You may take some off the table. You may take your full position off the table. So that's why it's called break-even supply, because enough people break even and they want to get out or at least exit partially the position. That's where the supply comes onto the market, and that's where you get resistance. So downward side of things, if you wanted to just use the previous low here, that wick is right at 24,800. However, if you wanted to use the VWAP zone as kind of an invalidation point here, a daily close below right around 24,100 would be your invalidation. But notice here, we did have price actually closing below that area before the big reversal that we saw back in January of 2023, December of 2022. So just keep in mind, this was really close to the original anchor point, so you can have some weird price action that occurs in the early times of the anchor versus when you have hundreds of candles that have formed or multiple candles that have formed. You definitely can use the VWAP in a little more less of a, let's say, flexible way. So we knew once we anchored it, we'd probably get some variation around this VWAP. But now, as price is established, a daily close below 24,100 at the bottom of this zone would definitely be something that's worth noting for a potential larger breakdown here. And then, as I mentioned on the upside, pretty much to the top of this break-even supply zone around 28,250 is going to be a pretty hard level to get above. And if we do, then I would definitely become even more bullish here. But for now, things are, I would say, slightly bullish leaning bias. You can see here that we did recently have this MACD cross way down here. And previously, when we have had these MACD crosses way down below the zero line, this has been an indication that we've got larger upside coming. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, Bitcoin sometimes has a mind of its own, so we'll just go and follow price action and follow these levels that I went over for invalidation or potential breakouts to the upside or breakdowns to the downside. We'll go into a couple individual names. We'll start with Tesla. Tesla has been one that really has just done absolutely nothing over the last 6 trading days. You've been in this extremely tight range. I like to call this like a barcode type pattern because it literally is just back and forth, back and forth. Kind of looks like a barcode, especially if you change these colors just to black and white. Until we can get above 261, I really don't see much of an edge here. I think you're just very range bound, and especially if you're trading options, it's going to chop you up. Even if you have time, you'll get chopped up for the most part, depending on how far out of the money you are. And then on the downside, until we close below 241, which is the bottom of this previous support zone and then acted as resistance back in late August, until we get a close below 241, this is just a very neutral setup. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, that until you get a breakout here, this could be range bound for quite some time, and there could be other names out there that have better setups. And so in the weekend video for Twitter subscribers, I definitely go over some of the setups that I think have a higher probability of playing out into the week ahead and even the week after that. So definitely, if you do want more of an in-depth kind of trade ideas and that type of thing, check out the Twitter subscription. As I mentioned, it's only $10 a month. Going into Apple, Apple had a really nice bounce off this VWAP zone from Thursday's, I'm going to call it maybe capitulation. Depends on what your definition of capitulation is. For me, it can simply just be short-term capitulation where, everyone stops out and then you get a reversal. For now, we did partially fill the gap above. The gap fills fully at 181.47. However, this seems to be just kind of an oversold bounce at this point. The weekly candle does not look amazing. I also touch on the weekly candles for some names in the written analysis for the subscription. So if you do want more in-depth weekly candle analysis as well, that will be posted on Sunday. For now, the bottom of this VWAP zone is definitely kind of your point at which things get a little sketchy. So right now, that VWAP, the bottom of that VWAP zone is right around 173.40. Until then, we could chop around. I mean, this was a huge move down over a 3-day period. So it could just be the dust settling over the next week and not really a lot of action here for Apple. So Upside, as I mentioned, 181.47 is the gap above. That could act as potential resistance. On the downside, the bottom of this VWAP zone is right around 173.40. So a daily close below that would definitely be pretty, I don't want to say sketchy, but would give the bears some ammunition. Now, this is simply just using a 0.1 standard deviation bands multiplier, and I'm using it on the upper band and the lower band if you did want to try to replicate this chart. This is anchored from the March 2nd pivot. Next one that we'll touch on, and this is the last one that we have, is Nvidia. One thing that I'll mention here is Nvidia has honestly still held a lot better than I thought it would. Still higher lows in place, so if we zoom in here and get a better idea of what's going on, pretty much what I did was I anchored the volume profile from the August 14th pivot. The VWAP is also anchored from this August 14th pivot as well. The volume shelf is an orange color because we do have a daily close slightly below this point of control here, kind of the bottom, the lower half of this shelf. So going into the week ahead, that is something to consider. Another thing to consider is we did actually close below the bottom of this band. This is a 0.35% band just to capture some of this price action that didn't respect the original VWAP perfectly. You can see here that on this move down on August 28th, this band acted as perfect support. So that's why I'm using this particular band, the 0.35%. I get a lot of questions, what standard deviation band do you use or what percent offset do you use? Completely depends on the stock and what company you're looking at. Each stock has its own personality. Something like Apple may have a 0.1% band, where something like Nvidia, which has some crazy volatility, may be using a 0.35% band. So the way that I kind of choose these percent offsets or these standard deviation multipliers is just going and looking and seeing, okay, where did we kind of bottom out, or where did price close above, or where was there a wick below the actual VWAP where price invalidated this VWAP. That's kind of how I come up with these. Sometimes it's trial and error. Sometimes, if you do it enough, you can just look at it and get a general idea of what it's probably going to be. But there is no default standard deviation band. Each stock has its own personality, so each stock is definitely going to have different standard deviation multipliers and even percent offsets depending on what you're looking at. So as I mentioned, we did close below. Now, if we do move to the upside, you would potentially be using this swing high. And I say potentially because you got to use what works for you. I'm always using VWAPs, anchored VWAPs from a pivot point or a swing high or a swing low. So the swing high from September 1st, this VWAP is currently right around 473.20. Remember, the VWAP changes day to day or candle to candle because as new price and volume evolve, it's taking in new information and creating the VWAP changes daily. It's just like a moving average. So going into Monday, at least, we're right around 473.25, give or take, 10, 20 cents. I try not to be exactly precise on these levels because that's just not how price reacts. Price has zones that it respects, not exact price levels. And if it does, it's likely just a coincidence. So swing high VWAP here from the September 1st reversal here, as I mentioned, would be your upside into Monday. No idea what that will be into Tuesday. It depends on how much volume comes in versus what the price is. So going into Monday, 73, let's just call it 73.20 all the way up to 73.50. Downside, if we do continue down and break below Thursday's low here at 451.52, the gap fills below at 435.78, and that would be your main area to watch below. So hopefully this video is helpful in understanding, a little more about, one, how I look at the markets. If this is a new video for you and you haven't checked out any of the previous videos I do a ton of analysis on Twitter, both in the subscription for $10 a month, but also I just do public posts as well, especially educational posts. Not only educational posts, but educational videos. So if you do want to check out those videos, like and subscribe this video, and it will definitely start recommending some of the other videos that I have done. What is a hollow candle? What is a volume profile? Those types of videos I think are imperative to learn if you are going to potentially be a subscriber or somebody that's just following my analysis on Twitter publicly. You still need to be able to understand the language somewhat in order to follow the analysis. So I do try to make these videos. The next video that I'm going to do, I'm not exactly sure what day I'm going to be doing it, but I am going to be going over the anchored VWAP in different ways to use the anchored VWAP that I learned from Brian Shannon. So full disclosure, I am a student of Brian Shannon, especially when it comes to the anchored VWAP. Never even knew what the anchored VWAP was before I met him, and it's completely changed the way I look at the markets, especially considering I have an economics background and really using a volume-weighted average price. Really makes sense when you're looking at supply and demand areas, that type of thing. So that will be the next video I put out. So if you do enjoy this video or other videos that I've put out, would really appreciate your support and liking and subscribing. And obviously on YouTube, subscribing is free. And if you have any questions, you can comment in the comment section. I'm always happy to answer any questions you have. And I will put my Twitter profile link as well if you want to just check out my Twitter profile. It's just Jake__Wujastik, WUJASTYK. And I will put that link in there so you don't have to remember that. Thank you, everybody, for watching this. I hope it was a helpful update going into the week ahead. We definitely went over some important levels to watch going into Monday, and hope everyone has a great weekend, and thank you for watching.